these proceedings are here to see that justice is done. And justice is, as any reasonable person would tell you, the finding of the truth. Only we have a problem here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Beningo. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist and counselor. And today we are discussing the case of Mackenzie Shirilla. So for those of you that either are not familiar with this case or don't remember it, Mackenzie is the teenager from Strongsville, Ohio. That's on the northeastern side, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, who in July of 2022, just after high school graduation, was driving her boyfriend and her boyfriend's friend home from a sleepover with a group of their very close friends around 5 in the morning, a little after 5 a.m., and proceeded to get into a terrible car accident at 100 miles per hour. Was to all of the police on the scene the worst car accident they had ever seen. Absolutely horrific. Mackenzie was found underneath the dashboard, but still alive. And you'll note the right side of the car does get more of the damage than the left. Her boyfriend, Dominic, and his friend, Davion, were dead on arrival. Davion Flanagan was the same age as Mackenzie. They both had graduated high school maybe a month before, 2 months before this accident happens in July. I think graduation is end of May or middle of June. He was a football player, a pretty good running back apparently for the high school. And this story is really tragic because Davion was apparently a really good kid, a star athlete, but suffered a terrible injury to his knee just at the beginning of the football season that fall. And because of that, started hanging out with the wrong kids, I guess, or the pot-smoking kids. And he and his two sisters were adopted by what appears to be the nicest couple you could ever find in 2012, I believe. And so, they weren't babies. They were a little older. He would have been the oldest. But it looked like just a loving, supportive couple that adopted the three kids. He got to stay with his biological siblings, the two girls. So just really tragic. And apparently he had plans to stay, not to go home with them. And at the very last minute, as they were walking out the door, changed his plans, said, no, I think I want to go home, take a nap, get a shower before I come back and we go do whatever. So just a horribly, horribly tragic story any way that you slice it. Dominic was a few years older than Mackenzie and was a very ambitious young guy. He was trading crypto and stocks, apparently. I would also argue may have been selling a little weed here and there on the side based on everything I've seen. But everyone thought he was a great kid, very ambitious, always had money. Mackenzie had been with him for 4 years since she was a freshman in high school. Mackenzie was basically a wannabe influencer.
I'm not even cool. I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die. Wake up, check the mirror. Guess what? I'm still flawless. Put on something fierce. You know that I bought it. Doing my best, dressed for success. All that I hear is yes, yes, yes. I stand out from the rest, 'cause nobody does it like me. Nobody does it like me.
Shortly after the crash, Strongsville police were notified that they had received concerning emails from the community that the defendant and her mother were seeking employment with the Los Angeles modeling agency. Mackenzie Shirilla said to Vitali, "Thank you for the comment. I would love to work with you guys. I've been emailing you guys a lot. Such a great opportunity. Thank you."
Is there a date?
There is not a date on this, Your Honor. Based on the investigation, it was delivered to the police while the defendant was still in the Metro Health Hospital. So it was during that time period. She was in the hospital for several weeks. Shortly after being released from the hospital, the police were provided additional videos of the defendant from her wheelchair as she attended a concert down in the Flats. And again, Your Honor, I'm introducing these to the court to show the shocking lack of remorse. This was something that was being exhibited while the investigation was still going on, before she was charged and arrested in November of last year. And these were the sort of things that were coming to the police, and the shocking lack of remorse, coupled with the fact that the defendant was reported driving an automobile shortly after this event, that she was seen in Strongsville again driving a car. In spite of the fact that, as her mother testified, she got dizzy sometimes from a condition that she had to take salt pills for.
Maybe by definition, a mean girl, smoked weed pretty much constantly at this time, at the time of the collision. And as it turns out, her and Dominic had what she actually herself, what you're about to see, called a rocky relationship, first love sort of situation. But it became clear after the fact, after the accident, that though they were living together, yes, that's right, Mackenzie's parents felt she was mature enough to move in with Dominic into his home. So they were living together at the time. There was definitely trouble in paradise, that Dominic had gotten to the point where he felt he was pulling away. And she, in the days and weeks before the crash, had been in a bit of a panic on multiple occasions, calling. There was even an incident where Dom called his mom and I think his uncle to come get him, essentially while driving on the highway, because Mackenzie was driving in a fit and was driving erratically and threatening to crash the car. And this was just weeks, maybe even a week before the actual incident. It also turned out after the fact that there was surveillance footage of her driving in the exact route where she would eventually drive into a wall at 100 miles per hour. So, of course, initially, everybody assumed it was, they had been drinking or under the influence of drugs of some kind, and it was an accident. It was, recklessness, carelessness, teenage behavior. But as the investigators learned more about what actually had happened that night through urine and blood testing to see what was in her system at the time of the crash, through learning about the relationship as friends of Dominic stepped forward to say that things were not good between them.
I personally feel like she was trying to kill herself in that crash, and she failed on doing so, is what I feel like. And I feel like she had no regard for Davion, and I feel like they got in an argument, her and Dom.
Dominic's mother had found a second cell phone of his where he was actually surreptitiously recording her.
You lied. You lied and said you would never lock me out of the house again. That is why we got back together last time we broke up.
You broke up with me earlier.
Because you are a little weak.
You broke up with me earlier. You literally broke up with me earlier.
This is your last chance to open the door, or you are not coming out of this house all night, because I will not leave.
Why would I just let you in my house if you broke up with me? You're threatening to break my
No.
you're threatening to key my car, threatening to break the doors.
I will key your car if you do not let me in the house.
You're gonna key my car if I don't
If you don't let me in the house, yes.
In these rage fits, threatening to break things, calling him names, threatening to break into the house that they were both living in because he wouldn't let her in because she was, being crazy and threatening him. From her perspective, she thought, I'm going to marry this man. We're going to be together forever. He took care of her financially. He bought her things. They were both sort of very materialistic, flaunting designer products, always having to have designer outfits and Fendi and Gucci sunglasses and earrings and whatever. Apparently, Dominic even wanted to start his own clothing line eventually. It didn't seem like he was aggressive back, and he took a lot from her because he loved her. Okay. They were also in this kind of close little friend group who are still advocating, it appears, for Mackenzie for her innocence. Another important part of the story is that Mackenzie's parents seem very well-intended, but very permissive.
My God.
In July 2022, a day that brought a mix of pain,
I struggled with this because
relief, and guilt.
Because how can I feel bad that these two boys died and feel grief with these families and then be absolutely overjoyed that my kid is alive?
It's been almost 3 years since the deadly crash in Strongsville that killed Mackenzie Shirilla's boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend, Davion Flanagan. Now, Shirilla's parents are speaking out, insisting that the justice system got it wrong.
Show me one piece of evidence, one, that says she did this on purpose. Show it to me. Here it is. That's it. Then she's right where she belongs, and she's guilty of it. But there isn't any.
And what we know about substance use disorders, while permissive parenting is not a cause of addiction to drugs and alcohol, it is a common factor. Parents who either turned a blind eye or who didn't think weed was a big deal or who didn't think drinking was such a big deal. So it's not something that you can say causes a substance use problem, but it's common amongst those who have one. And I can tell you what the psychology is of a teenage girl who's very insecure, just like Mackenzie is. She may not appear to others to be that because she's, flaunting and wearing big sunglasses and half naked in school. But that's exactly what indicates to us that she was so insecure, right? If you have to go to such great lengths to show everyone that you're not insecure, that's a pretty good indication that you're incredibly insecure, that you need constant reinforcement, constant feedback from the world outside that you're beautiful, that you are worthy, that you're cool, that you whatever it is. So clearly she needed almost constant affirmation, and that she was using her friends, her boyfriend, social media to get that constant reinforcement or that constant affirmation. Am I good enough? Am I good enough? Am I good enough? From the world around her. But Mackenzie had a very clear track record of volatile behavior and of rage episodes that she couldn't control. Her friends that night say that Mackenzie actually, though she used to and would normally be smoking tremendous amounts of marijuana.
Kenzie didn't even smoke that night.
She was on like a smoke break because she was coughing up like black mucus in a way, or like bloody mucus. Something that was really bad.
Kenzie was sleeping by like 3 a.m. All I remember is Dom just like petting her head all night and just like cuddling up to her on the couch, and she was sleeping and he was just like caressing her hair. And then really early in the morning, around 5, Dom came into the kitchen and I was like, "Are you guys leaving?"
From bong hits on Instagram to smoking blunts while driving, right? Just constant evidence of a young girl addicted to marijuana. Her parents felt that it was the most harmless, that they'd much rather have her smoking weed than drinking a lot or doing much harder drugs like heroin or opiates, which makes sense, right? I'm not judging the behavior. I understand where the parents are coming from. When you have a kid like Mackenzie, who's essentially pretty out of control, going to do what she wants, whether you support it or not, you're in a very tough spot. And there hadn't been, let's face it, horrible consequences for her to that point. Now, a lot of that is because her parents, made excuses for. They rationalized it away. Mom is a classic codependent, which it only takes about 3 seconds of watching the sentencing hearing or the Netflix documentary to see that.
But she wasn't a bad kid. She didn't really need to be disciplined a whole lot. You know, her worst is her mouth.
School records showed one incident after the next of disrespect to teachers and fellow students. You just get a general picture of someone who does not have a lot of adult oversight.
There was an incident that happened. They suspended her for the last day of school. I had to get off work and come get her. And I walked in, I looked at my daughter, and she's sobbing. And I go, "Did you do it?" She looked at me and goes, "No." And I know when my daughter lies. I go, "Good enough for me, let's go." And I walked her out.
Her parents would offer excuses for her behavior. And typically, Mackenzie would walk away from those negative interactions at school with more freedom, less consequences, and her actions being completely excused away. But this was not someone who was unfamiliar with driving under the effects of marijuana.
And here's the thing about that. And I can't believe that nobody caught this, or that her team, if it's true, wouldn't have used this, because it's so obvious to me. But if she really wasn't smoking that entire day, and then they're doing this sleepover, she fell asleep around 3 a.m., according to her friends, in Dom's arms, and he's caressing her and, playing with her hair while she slept, whatever. If you wake up then at 5 a.m., so you've gotten only a couple of hours of sleep, you are already kind of a cranky teenage girl, very hormonal and insecure, and you are now also in active marijuana withdrawal because of the fact that most people minimize what the effects of marijuana are. They don't realize that it has effects, right? People just want to say, "Oh, it's safe and it's just a plant," right? And I get that. I'm not judging you if you smoke marijuana. I frankly could care less. But it does have very serious effects. I have worked with, I can't even count, hundreds of substance use disordered people in my life. And I've known thousands. And I can tell you that among the worst addictions I've ever seen, ever, are marijuana addictions. And not marijuana addictions with alcohol or marijuana addictions with opiates, but marijuana addictions. Because for some people, not for everyone, but for some people, for whatever reason, marijuana works in their body in such a way that creates the kind of addiction that causes them to be homeless, because once their family makes the final ultimatum and says, "Listen, we're not going to support you if you keep doing this," they can't stop. I have had more than one case where my client is so addicted to marijuana that they cannot stop no matter what we do, no matter how many rehabs, no matter what we do to try to help them. Can't, won't, don't stop. After years, a decade of this, more. So for some people, marijuana is as addictive as heroin. It is not for the average person. And by the way, neither is alcohol. For the average person, alcohol is a completely benign substance that, if used safely, is not going to cause you any risk for addiction at all. Because in order to become addicted, you would have to essentially force that upon your body. And alcohol is so toxic to every major organ system in the body that your body just doesn't want that. It rejects it just straight out. But for some people who have a different genetic structure, for whatever reason, it is extraordinarily addictive. And I've had clients who were teenagers so addicted to alcohol that they were having delirium tremors the way you would see in a 72-year-old man who's been drinking his whole life. So with addiction, it is not a one-size-fits-all situation. Certainly, it never really is, ever. And I've never seen it where it's a one-size-fits-all situation. But particularly with substances of abuse, who you are, your physiology is a big, big, important part of the discussion. But if you are somebody who smokes marijuana to excess, to the levels that Mackenzie was smoking it, for the length of time that she was smoking it, and then you stop, what's going to happen is your mood, your psychology, your physiology is going to suffer. You're going to have a physical withdrawal. And that physical withdrawal is going to affect your mood. So, if she's crashing from a marijuana addiction at the same time as she's gotten no sleep, and she's a hormonal, insecure teenage girl who's been fighting with her boyfriend now for weeks and is worried that he's leaving her, if he even just didn't look at her the right way that morning as they're walking out the door, if he didn't hold her hand the way she thinks he should have, she could have gotten into a spiral internally, a cycle, a loop, a negative feedback loop internally. Screw him. I'm going to show him. He doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. He's going to leave me, and just starts to escalate. And out of anger and frustration and spite, as they are making that fatal turn where she's driving like a normal person, between that turn and when she hits the wall, that rage, that out of control anger took over. It just won in that moment. That is the power of rage. That's the power of the combination of an out of control adolescent girl who's deeply insecure, who's coming down from smoking incredibly insane amounts of marijuana for a long time, who has no oversight, no skills, no idea how to self-regulate, and who's afraid that this man who she's, counting on being there to take care of her for the rest of her life is leaving. The kind of terror that would elicit. Carelessness, fear, and just anger. So this is a young girl who, without a doubt, in my opinion, made a horrific decision that was every bit of exactly what it seems. This was a Toyota, so it was the Toyota telematics system. That's the car data that provided evidence in support of exactly what it looks like Mackenzie did do here, which is accelerate the car at full gas pedal. 100% she was pushing the gas pedal, no brake, and just in an episode of out of control rage was like, I'm going to show you. This is a young kid, right? This is a kid who's physiologically underdeveloped. And that's the problem. I know that there's an argument to be made to try a 17-year-old as an adult. But from a purely neurochemical perspective, a teenager is not a fully formed adult. They do not have a fully formulated prefrontal cortex. They do not have the type of impulse control inherently that a 32-year-old female does, right? So I don't think that this was a kid who may have been on her way to developing narcissistic traits, but I don't think so. I think this is more of a permissive parenting, out of control, reinforced, entitled teenager who was very insecure, did not have any tools psychologically to calm herself down, to talk herself out of this kind of rage spiral, was looking to her boyfriend, to her parents, to social media, and to marijuana to make her feel better. And when those things were not able to do that, she was unable to talk herself out of these episodes, out of these rage spirals. The other thing that really stood out to me with this case is I don't know who this lawyer was. Apparently, he was a high-priced, like, Cleveland attorney. I can't even imagine that that's true. He completely botches this case. I mean, the whole way through. And one of the biggest ways that they screw this up is they pick a bench trial. Now, there are times, like if you had followed the Kelsey Fitzsimmons case recently, that was a case where all the indicators leading up to the trial were that he was going to be a very fair judge to Kelsey. And so, of course, in that case, you pick a bench trial. Because in that case also, according to the law was on her side, for sure, right? There was not, it was a he said, she said, and if it's he said and she said, and you believe them both, you got to acquit. Because, it's he said, she said. That's it. And that's what this was. This case with Mackenzie Shirilla, that's not what happened. There was tremendous evidence, overwhelming evidence, and it was very physical evidence. In other words, a video of her traveling at 100 miles per hour. Accident reconstruction reports saying that the vehicle was in great shape, everything was working as it should have been, and that, the gas pedal was pressed to 100% for at least 5 seconds leading up to the crash. So all the evidence supported that this was intent, right? Additionally, the road that she was driving on, if she had for some reason fallen asleep or become unconscious, there's no way that the steering would have continued the course it was on because of the way that the road itself was designed. In other words, if your foot for some reason, was pressed onto the gas by accident, the car would have veered off into a different direction. It wouldn't have stayed the course to go straight into the wall. So there was nothing but physical evidence in support of the fact that this was intentional. Then when you add the audio video of her screaming and threatening Dom, the incident 1 week earlier where I think the uncle, because Dominic had this huge Italian family, I think they were Italian, huge family, where the mother got a call, and then I think the uncle got a call to come to the highway because she was driving so crazy. I don't know what they were going to do. I guess he was going to try to get out of the car and then have his uncle pick him up. I don't know. But she was in the car screaming and yelling, threatening to kill them both in a car accident. So when you have all of that and you add it together, there's no way that a judge especially was going to acquit. I mean, no chance. Now, a jury, to me, you might have been able to play to their sympathies. This is a young girl. She was a mess. Had they talked about the weed withdrawal, I don't know if that would have helped or hurt her, but it could have been a factor if they were smart enough to realize that. Or maybe that isn't true. I don't know what the levels were. But if it was a factor, it could have been something that they used. They could have just owned the fact that she had mental health issues. Again, maybe not an excuse, but in that case, you might have been able to play to the sympathies of some of the jurors who have teenagers themselves, who were teenagers themselves, and who understand that things can get crazy in a teenage girl's brain. It really can. But they didn't do that. And going with a bench trial in this case was just like the worst decision ever. I don't know how anyone could have thought that was a good idea. So they clearly did not have, adequate representation or guidance, and still to this day, the parents and Mackenzie obviously are not willing to take responsibility for this. Mom continues to make excuses, as many as she can come up with, and therefore, so does Mackenzie. Stay tuned for part 2, where we are going to review the statement of Mackenzie Shirilla.
It is the defense counselor's duty to protect the rights of the individual, as it is the prosecution's duty to uphold and defend the laws of the state. Justice for all. Only we have a problem here.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright.
This is me reminding you to like this video. Like the video. I promise if you get up right now and you like this video, I will never sing again. Comment, subscribe.